With all the talk about the big RPGs lately in comparisons to the classics, a lot of the more niche titles have flown under the radar, just as with many of the games we herald as masterpieces today once did. Like the Shadowrun trilogy, there are some real gems out there if you're willing to sort through the constant deluge of streamer base and subgenre of the week, so think of this as an opportunity to shine some light on a few games that might be worth your time. This video will be covering two different games that I've never played before. I've heard good stuff about the former, while the latter is meant to be the closest thing we've had to classic Fallout since the original itself. So, let's get into it. Let's be honest, as much as we'd like to pretend otherwise, it's easy to be taken in by all the pretty graphics and fancy ray trace slicing nowadays. RPGs are no different. It's why people will always remember the open tundras of Skyrim or the bustling streets of Novigrad far more than the faces of Morrowind or Gothic NPCs that not even a mother could love. As much a trade-off for budget reasons as an intentional throwback to the games of yesteryear, indie games since the explosion of digital distribution around 10-15 years ago now have almost all fallen into that same pixel aesthetic, to the point it honestly makes them hard to distinguish one roguelike or Survivors from any other. But then there's Skald against the Black Priory, sweeping in to fill that CRPG-shaped hole in the market with an emphasis on classic. Funnily enough, at risk of being accused as a tourist myself by the truly old-school crowd, I haven't played Ultima or Wizardry or any of the progenitors of the role-playing game we know today. It's what caught my interest in Skald initially, but I'll be totally honest and admit that I was put off by the crunchy graphics. The settings thankfully have some options to toggle through if you're finding it particularly hard to read the text. I did squint a bit at first, but although it takes some getting used to, there's a genuinely great game here. What's all the more impressive, it was made almost entirely by one guy. I'm glad I took a chance on Skald, but be aware that comes with a few caveats. Before we get into that though, let's talk about the story. The setup is nothing out of the ordinary per se. You're a vassal who, on returning home to your lord, is sent to a mysterious, rugged island looking for his daughter and the girl you once grew up with. Where Skald differentiates itself from the million other games before it is in atmosphere and setting. If you love Darkest Dungeon and squishy, eldritch sea god vibes, you're going to be right at home here. There is something fundamentally wrong with the island of Idra, and just about everything that could have gone wrong has. Certainly by the time of your arrival, after you're left stranded by a gigantic monster straight from Lovecraft's tales, which drags your ship down into the abyss. This is classic dark fantasy at its best. Strange figures in hooded robes utter blasphemous prayers, dark, oppressive woods hide all manner of bloodthirsty creatures, flesh-eating rats scamper through filthy sewers, and you're one of the few still trying to hold it all together. I say classic because this is dark fantasy straight out of the pulp novels that define the genre. Skald never strays into gratuitous or edgy territory with the over-reliance on rape or torture for shock value, or a story full of awful people doing awful things to each other. There are the fearful refugees, sure, the few attempts to keep some kind of law and order together and survive, but there are also upstanding knights, clerics, and people still trying to do the right thing. A little light in the dark is still something against profane abominations. Be prepared to read a fair bit. This isn't Planescape Torment by any means. It's not going to overwhelm you with the life story of everyone you meet, but you should rein in your expectations if you think there's going to be full voice acting in a solo indie RPG. It's all unvoiced, but the beautiful sprite work and presumably the same developer who made it behind the writing is able to convey some striking imagery, even if the cast of characters are little more than an excuse to string you from one quest to the next. Companions are similar, with the occasional comment, but it's flavor text for what are essentially faceless mercenaries at most. We'll be talking about Fallout more in a bit, but if it wasn't already obvious by the look of it, this is another game that won't make any attempt to hold your hand either. No quest markers, no big neon signs telling you where to go. You'll need to pay attention to dialogue and the journal about how to progress, and side quests that often tie back into progressing the main story too. I'm not saying this is deliberately esoteric, not at all. The game goes to great lengths to tutorialize combat and other systems, but after a certain vampire game that shall remain unnamed, I can't tell you how refreshing it is to have a proper RPG that values your intelligence and expects you to pay attention attention. Speaking of combat though, let's circle back to gameplay because Skald doesn't put its best foot forward. Literally. The movement system is certainly unique and it's going to take a while to get used to. Even now, I'm not really sure if I like it per se, and whether the developer just decided to be different and not necessarily good. Skald used WASD to move around a standard grid or tile-based system, and you're essentially hopping from one to the next, which was a neat way to save on animation cost. That would be fine on its own, but for some truly baffling reason, to interact with things, you bump or walk into them to activate it. Maybe that doesn't sound too bad on paper, but let me show you some examples of trying to walk through a camp or get past a crowd of people who keep blocking your way. What compounds the issue even further is the retro aesthetic makes it difficult at times to try and see what is or isn't accessible. Skald does not account for simply stepping over something like a crate or debris on the ground. You have to walk around it. Yeah, that's just as bad as it sounds. Where this gets worse is in combat. Positioning is a big deal, but more often than not, you're going to be fighting in a cramped space and with a large group. Why is that a problem? Well, because just like a tiny bit of clutter or whatever on the ground that you're not allowed to simply walk over, you have to go around any of your companions or waste a turn switching places. What this means in practice is that out of the 6 total party members, 1 or 2 of them will often just stand back and you're left with little choice but to pass their turn defending because you can't get anywhere near a target to hit them, assuming they don't have ranged attacks like spell or a bow. This brings down combat significantly, where a lot of encounters can feel like a waste of time. Skald sits within this weird middle ground where it's both too easy and too hard. I played on normal difficulty for the record, which is the second highest of the 4 total modes, and there's also custom options to tailor to your liking. The problem with combat in Skald is twofold. First, because of the movement system, you can only attack targets adjacent to you, never diagonally, which ties back into what a pain in the ass positioning is from earlier. Second, and by far the worst, is that the developer seems to have compensated by the relatively easy to kill enemies by just adding more of them. This turns combat into a tedious slog, one that I eventually started to avoid as much as I could through stealth, because the positioning issue becomes almost unbearable. Stats and abilities are so simple, warrior classes have essentially won the game by the time you get multi-attack early on, but by adding more enemies on screen, the balancing was completely thrown out of whack. The more there are, the more attacks being made, the higher chances of getting a crit that suddenly screws you over in what otherwise would be a basic encounter. Sure, sometimes these crits will be in your favor. Backstab is similar to multi-attack for rogues that can essentially one-shot enemies, but that's not really from any tactical choice on your end, is it? Maybe this all sounds like a good thing to you, but when the real difficulty of Skald is just trying to manage where everyone is standing, and you're constantly being blocked because it's hard to see which tiles are accessible, yes, even with the shift key, Skald lacks any true tactical or systemic depth, and combat is more frustrating than anything else, to the point I'd recommend you just play on easy to get it over with. Stealth is also really goofy at times, as you can see here, with enemies only just alerted while I've been wailing on their comrades right next to them in plain sight, while other times they'll continue to spot you from almost off the map. It certainly doesn't help that you can't move the camera around once combat starts either. This game has a lot of simple things that start to add up which should have been there from the start. Other gripes I have include the fact quick load doesn't work the majority of the time, only while exploring, never in combat or the preparation state, or how raycasting with the mouse can be iffy on detection sometimes when you're trying to move to a particular cell, or how trying to move to one enemy in a mob wastes your turn because the game automatically thinks you're trying to disengage. These are the kind of quality of life changes that would have made things feel a lot smoother. I don't want this to be too harsh because overall I enjoyed my time with Skald. The sprite work is really nice, the writing is solid, and the interweaving quests and all that jazz make for a fun retro RPG to delve into. The game certainly falters in the combat department, but at the same time, it's unfair to put all of this on a solo developer that clearly put everything he had into making the game. This is an impressive feat, especially for an indie dev. In fact, it reminds me of another throwback retro RPG called Mecha Jammer, which was very, very rough at release, saved only by its open-ended design reminiscent of Fallout 1. Skald is in a far better shape and better designed overall, but it's not exactly the second coming of Ultima 7 either. If you're willing to look past its quirks, Skald Against the Black Priory is a memorable throwback to the games of yesteryear and a reminder that genuine RPGs are still being made. It's also not some sprawling epic either. I hit the second island around the 10-hour mark, so I'm guessing 15 to 20 tops. Full price or on sale, you're getting your money's worth either way. Good stuff. Well, it seems I got filtered by Underrail, but not for the reasons you're expecting. About 20 minutes of playtime is all I got from it while working on this video, and it's like no one even tested this build. First, the quick save corrupted, making it essentially unusable to load or save, so I had to quit and restart. Then, on finishing the tutorial, the game locked up completely on a black screen. That's it, I guess. I can't go any further. I guess I can't really say much, but oh boy, this game is rough, especially since it's been out for 10 years now. There was me thinking this big, masochistic throwback to classic Fallout would be right up my alley, but it doesn't even work. Suffice to say, I removed the sequel from my wishlist as soon as I lodged the refund request, and I don't recommend Underrail to anyone at all, considering, it doesn't even work. Whether it's as truly ball-bustingly hard as they say, a punishing but rewarding RPG, we'll never know. Sorry to all the people who wanted me to check it out, but that's that, I guess. This is a rather short and anticlimactic ending to this little review, but oh well. It'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming for the next few videos. Thanks, Underrail.